Hello, beautiful homemakers. I'm in the mood for homemaker story time again. It's been really rainy here in sunny Southern California, and that got me thinking about this short story called The Old-Fashioned Day. It's in a children's book called The Golden Book of 365 Stories, a story for every day of the year by Kathryn Jackson, pictures by Richard Scarry. And I read to you my favorite some time ago, Lucky Mrs. Hen, which, by the way, is not the little red hen. And that was in a video called Lucky Mrs. You, taking that story and applying it to our everyday life. And in the same way, this story for children can be applied to our life. It's a good example of homemaking. So the old-fashioned day on page 190. Anne was sure her mother had forgotten all about what it was like to be a little girl. Such a stormy day, she thought. No electricity, so there's no television or radio. And when I asked what I could do, Mother said, "Why not make up the beds?" Just the same, Anne did make the beds as neatly as she could. "Here, Anne," Mother said then. "You can shell the peas now." "Shell peas? I didn't know they had shells." "Fresh ones do," Mother explained, showing Anne how to open the pods with her thumbs and push out the green rows. It was fun shelling those peas. Pop, 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 they went into the pan, while Mother made gingerbread and put it in the oven. "Is it nearly lunchtime?" Anne asked. "No, we have time to play hearts first." So she and Anne sat at the kitchen table and played 4 games, and Anne won the last 2. By then, the storm made everything as dark as evening. Mother lighted candles for lunch. She and Anne did the dishes by candlelight, too. "Now," said Mother, "will you read to me while I make applesauce and put the chicken on to cook?" Anne chose Uncle Remus because it was so funny. And she had read only 3 stories because of the strange words and because of laughing so much when Daddy came home. "I'm early because of the storm. What a day! But it certainly looks and smells and sounds cozy in here. What have you 2 been doing?" "Lots of things," said Anne. "Why, we did a whole week of things today. Mother, how did we get so much time?" "I'm not sure," laughed Mother. "But today was just like days when I was a little girl. Maybe we had more time together because we had fewer modern conveniences." Anne thought about that, and she thought she understood. Without radio and television and the dishwasher and all that, they had done everything 2 by 2. Maybe that was what Mother meant. Anne wasn't sure. But she was sure, very sure, that her mother had not forgotten what it was like to be a little girl after all. And that reminds me of stormy days in my own home growing up. Even though we were in the suburbs where we lived, the electricity would go out during storms. And I remember being in the kitchen with my mother as she was making dinner, and she would always have time to play hearts, crazy eights, war, old maid, and memory, amongst other things. With no electricity, we would get out the candles and we would play. And occasionally she would even let us go splashing into the puddles. That was always fun. And on page 22 of this book has a good reminder for parents in this half-page short story. It's on page 22 and it's called Shush. It was quiet in the house. Shush. The mother was sleeping, taking a nap. Shush. The baby was sleeping, taking its nap too. Drip, drip, drip. The water was dripping into the dishpan full of lunch dishes. "Do you suppose we could?" whispered Katy. "I suppose we could," whispered Peter. And swish, 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 Katy washed all those dishes shining and clean. Peter dried them all, shining and dry. Then Peter put a chair at the cupboard and opened the doors. Katy handed up the dishes, and Peter put them all away in the right places. But just as he reached for the last one, the big sandwich plate, it slipped out of his hands and out of Katy's hands. Crash! What a terrible crash! It woke the baby from its nap. The baby began to cry. It woke the mother from her nap. She picked up the baby, and down the stairs she came. Into the kitchen she came. But she didn't say, "Oh dear, my sandwich plate!" And she didn't say, "Why can't you just let things be?" She said, "Why, Peter and Katy, you did all the lunch dishes for a surprise?" Then she put the baby into the high chair and hugged her bigger children, and swept up the sandwich plate, and took out the cookie plate, and sugar and eggs and flour, and all the good things she needed for making round, crisp sugar cookies. And that is the proper way to parent. That brings us to page 174, The Rainy Day Cookies. And I think I've told you before that we would always love rainy days because my mother would be baking chocolate chip cookies. It was raining when Jill walked home from school, but Jill didn't mind. Today was the day she and Mother were going to make cookies for the Brownie Scouts party. And rainy days are nice when you're baking, Jill thought, as she slipped off her raincoat and went to find Mother. But when she saw Mother, propped up on the sofa with her eyes watery and a sneeze ready to come out, Jill's face fell. "Oh, it's hay fever again, isn't it?" she cried. "I'm afraid so, Jill," Mother said, holding her sneeze back. "And I am sorry that we can't make cookies this time, but you can run down to the bakery and choose 4 dozen of any kind you'd like. That will be fun, won't it?" "Yes, it will," Jill said doubtfully, though she did add, "and I'm sorry you have hay fever." Then Mother tried to say, "Thank you, darling," but instead she said, "Achoo!" and looked so watery and sad that she and Jill both had to laugh. And while they were laughing, Jill had a wonderful idea. "Mother, I always help with the cookies, and I always watch everything you do. So do you suppose that this time I could make them myself?" Mother thought for a minute and sneezed for 2 minutes. Then she said, "Why, yes, Jill, if you'll just be careful about the oven, I'm sure you can." Jill was careful. She was careful about measuring and sifting and mixing, too. She was especially careful to wear Mother's pot-holder mittens when she put her cookies into the oven. And since Jill had made those cookies exactly as Mother did, they came out of the oven looking exactly like Mother's. "They're delicious, Jill," said Mother when they had each sampled one. "Yes, they are, aren't they?" said Jill, hurrying back to clean up in the kitchen. "You know, Mother, now that I can cook, you can have hay fever any time you want." That started Mother laughing and sneezing again. "Oh, Jill, I don't want to have hay fever ever. But since I must, it certainly is wonderful to have a big girl who can take care of things for me." Jill thought it was, too. She thought she'd set the table for supper when the dishes were done. But first, just for a moment, She stood very still, listening to the rain drumming on the window pane, and smelling the proud, delicious smell of the cookies she had made for the Brownie Scouts party. Enjoy your rainy days, and bake cookies for your family. Plan to do that soon. And try to cook without making a mess. I make sure my kitchen is clean. Then I pull out all of the ingredients and put it on my counter. And as I use each ingredient, I put that ingredient back. And while my cookies or anything is baking, I wash the dishes. And I never have a dirty kitchen anymore, especially since I have cleared my counters like Dawn at the Minimum Mom taught me, and I've given away half of all my dishes. I had many sets of dishes mainly that I had inherited. Instead of keeping all of them, I kept 2 to 4 of each pattern. I rotate them out per season, but I just don't have as many dishes to do because we get the dishes done instead of letting them pile up. It really works. As a good homemaker, we need to look on the bright side of things even when they don't go our way. And that reminded me of this little story on page 81, Mr. Sugarplum's Rainy Day. Mr. Sugarplum did not like rain. He said it was a dark, wet, splattery bother. And on rainy days he sat scowling in his easy chair, his feet tucked under his 5 cozy, furry cats. The only time he brightened up was at mealtime. Then Mr. Sugarplum went to his kitchen and made a big kettle of soup. "Nothing nicer than good hot soup on a rainy day," he told his cats, who smilingly agreed. But one rainy day at mealtime, a very rainy day at that, Mr. Sugarplum found nothing at all to put into his big soup kettle. "Not so much as a carrot top," he cried. "Someone will have to go to the store." His cats made it clear that they weren't going. All 5 disappeared under the easy chair, with never a whisker showing. So Mr. Sugarplum bundled into all the rainy day clothes he could find, and scowling most dismally, set out himself. Never a glance did he waste on the shining, rain-washed town, or the swift little streams at the curb full of paper sailboats, or at the park, all clean and green and fresh. "Dark, wet, splattery bother," he scowled. But when he got to the grocery store, Mr. Sugarplum's scowl turned into a grin. "What beautiful vegetables!" he cried. "What full pea pods! What crisp carrots! What round red tomatoes! Juicy okra! Succulent mushrooms! And what golden bursting ears of corn! I've never seen such an array." "They are extra fine," nodded the grocer, filling Mr. Sugarplum's basket to the top. "And all, of course, because we've had our share of fine rainy days." "Is that so?" marveled Mr. Sugarplum. "Is that really so? And only think, I never knew." On his way home, Mr. Sugarplum splashed in the puddles and admired all the fine rainy day sights. He even made a little boat out of his grocery list and sailed it at the curb. His cats were amazed when he came home, all dripping wet but fairly beaming. "Nothing nicer than good hot soup on a rainy day," he remarked, as he put his big soup kettle on the stove. Then, peeping into his market basket, Mr. Sugarplum amazed his amazed cats still more by adding, "In fact, I don't know of anything much nicer than rain on a fine, wet, rainy day." And I think we have time for one more story. On page 219, it's another one of my favorites. Throughout the years, I've often commented to my son, just like that man in the Unlucky Little Store story. And he knows exactly what I mean. Page 219, The Unlucky Little Store. There was once a frowning man who kept a little store, but hardly anyone ever came in to buy the ice cream and candy and popcorn and newspapers he had to sell. It's because not enough children live around here, he told himself, or because not enough people pass by and see my wares, or else it's because everyone who does passes on his way to the big store on the avenue. Or maybe, he went on one particularly dull day, it's because this is an unlucky little store. With that, he frowned such a frown as he'd never frowned before. And it's got a great picture of him scowling, and his cat is scowling too. Goodness, thought a customer in a black overcoat. I don't want to go in there after all. And he turned around and started off. But as he did, his black coat made the glass door into a sort of mirror. The frowning man, who was just inside, caught sight of his reflected frown. There, that proves it, he growled. When my unlucky little store gets a customer, it's that awful frowning kind. And then suddenly that frowning man saw that it wasn't a customer at all, but his own face frowning that way. What a surprise that was! Why, the man himself began to laugh. No wonder hardly anyone comes into my store. Who would want to buy from a frown like that? He laughed so hard that the customer in the black coat heard him and came back and bought 3 whole gallons of ice cream. And the children down the street heard him and came to buy candy and popcorn. And the mothers and fathers came to buy newspapers. In and out they streamed all afternoon and ever after, because busy as he was, the store man never did frown again, and he always had time for a jolly smile and word and nod. How do you manage to keep smiling day in and day out, early morning and late night, and rain or shine? A customer asked him. That's simple, said the jolly store man. It's because my little store is so lucky. It's in a neighborhood just full of children, and with plenty of passers-by to see my wares, and no one at all who passes by ever seems to be on his way to the much bigger store over on the avenue. Attitude makes so much difference in your life. At the grocery store the other day, I saw a grumpy-looking man just like this man. Oh, his face was just filled with lines. He was probably in his 80s, and he had the grumpiest look on his face. But I just swung my cart towards him, said excuse me with a bright smile, and his face just lit up, and it completely transformed him. What do you look like when you're frowning? Practice smiling instead. And that's enough for Homemaking Story Time. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.